He shipped his late grandfather's watch. It came back as a stranger's piece of junk, and eBay kept both the watch and the money on the buyer's side. This is not a story about a bad sale. This is a story about a scam so clean, so well executed, that an international marketplace's entire system bent over backwards to reward the criminal and punish the victim. And if you've ever sold anything valuable online, you need to hear every detail of what happened here, because this could happen to you tomorrow. Picture this. You inherit a Seiko Presage from your grandfather. Not a Rolex, not a Patek Philippe, a Seiko. A beautiful, sentimental piece that meant something real to someone you loved. You decide to sell it, list it on eBay for $1,200, do everything right, dozens of photos, original box, tracked and insured shipping, and then 8 days after delivery, your world turns upside down. Let's go back to where this started. A seller in Tampa, Florida, had his grandfather's Seiko Presage. If you're not familiar, the Presage is one of Seiko's more refined dress watch lines. It's not a cheap fashion watch, but it's also not the kind of watch that typically attracts counterfeiters the way a Rolex or an Audemars Piguet would. That's actually part of what makes this story so disturbing. This wasn't some obvious hustle targeting a $5,000 luxury piece. The buyer went after a $1,200 Seiko, which tells you something about how calculated this operation really was. The seller did his homework. Over 30 photographs documenting every single angle of that watch before it ever left his hands. The dial, the caseback, the crown, the serial number, the original box, the bubble wrap packing job. He sent it through USPS with tracking and insurance, textbook responsible selling. He'd done everything a reasonable, honest person would do when selling a meaningful item online. The buyer had decent feedback, nothing alarming. The sale went through cleanly at $1,200. So far, this looks like a perfectly normal eBay transaction. Then 8 days pass. 8 days after receiving the watch, the buyer opens a return request. The stated reason? The item was not authentic. Now let's pause on that for just a second, because that detail is important. Not authentic. For a Seiko. For a brand that is not commonly counterfeited at this price point. The seller was immediately confused, and rightfully so. This felt off from the very first moment. But before he could even respond properly, before he could present his documentation, before he could make any kind of case, eBay automatically approved the return. Automatic. No investigation, no conversation, no review of the 30-plus photographs that the seller had on file. The platform's automated system looked at a return request that said, "Not authentic," and just opened the door. The package came back, and it was not his watch. Let that sink in for a moment. He opens the return package expecting to see his grandfather's Seiko, and instead he's holding a broken knockoff, different serial number. The caseback looked nothing like the one in his own photographs. The crown was on the wrong side. This was not his watch. It wasn't even a convincing fake. It was a piece of junk that bore almost no resemblance to the original beyond being vaguely watch-shaped. He had proof, side-by-side photo comparisons, serial numbers that didn't match at all, documentation that he'd carefully prepared before the sale ever happened. He had a stronger evidentiary case than most people do in situations like this. He called eBay. Here's where this story takes the turn that will make your stomach drop. The buyer had submitted a report from a jeweler, some third-party jeweler, unverified, with no stated credentials in authenticating Seiko watches specifically, saying the item was fake. And eBay sided with that report, over photographic evidence of the serial number, over documentation of the original caseback, over 30-plus photographs taken before the watch ever shipped. The appeal was denied. So the math at the end of all this looks like this. The buyer has the real Seiko Presage, which is worth $1,200. The buyer also has his $1,200 back because eBay issued a full refund. And the seller in Tampa is sitting with a broken knockoff that belongs to no one, no money, and a watch that meant something to him personally because it belonged to his grandfather. Gone. He filed a police report in Tampa. A detective took his information down, but the detective told him something that honestly is the hard truth about these kinds of cases. They're difficult to pursue across state lines. The buyer was in Ohio. Tampa PD can document the crime, but getting Ohio law enforcement to prioritize a $1,200 theft case against one of their residents on behalf of a Florida victim, that's a long road. So where does that leave him? And more importantly, where would it leave you? Here's what you need to understand about this type of scam, because it has a name in the resale community. It's called a switcheroo scam, and it is devastatingly effective, specifically because of how return policies are structured on major platforms. The scammer buys your real item, ships back a fake or broken substitute, and files a return claiming the original item was inauthentic or not as described. The platform's buyer protection systems are designed to resolve disputes quickly, and quickly often means defaulting to the buyer before the seller can mount any defense. The seller in this story did everything right and still lost. That's not a failure of preparation. That's a systemic vulnerability being exploited by someone who knew exactly how the system worked. Now let's talk about what legal options actually exist here, because there are a few, and some of them have real teeth. Mail fraud is the first one to understand. Because this transaction went through USPS, federal mail fraud statutes potentially apply. Mail fraud under federal law covers schemes to defraud using the Postal Service and intentionally shipping a counterfeit item in response to a return while keeping the original absolutely fits that definition. Filing a complaint with the USPS Postal Inspection Service is a legitimate step here, and importantly, it's a federal agency. That means the state line problem that limits local police doesn't apply in the same way. The Postal Inspection Service has jurisdiction anywhere USPS was used, regardless of which state the buyer or seller is in. This is not a guarantee of action, but it puts the case in front of people who can actually reach across state lines. The FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, known as IC3, is another avenue. Online fraud of this nature falls within their mandate. Again, no guarantee, but these complaints do get aggregated, and if this buyer has done this before, a pattern of reports can trigger a real investigation. Small claims court is trickier across state lines, but not impossible. The seller would need to file in Ohio, where the buyer is located, which is a logistical challenge, but for $1,200, it may be worth it. Some small claims cases can be handled with minimal physical presence depending on the state, and a judgment, even if hard to collect, creates a legal record. eBay's seller protection policies also need to be challenged more aggressively. If you're ever in this situation, escalate beyond the standard customer service line. Request review by the trust and safety team specifically. Submit your documentation formally through their resolution center, not just verbally over the phone. Ask explicitly whether the item returned matches the item you shipped, and provide the serial number discrepancy in writing. If you have USPS insurance on the shipment, file a claim there as well, because insured mail that comes back as a different item may qualify as a loss. And document everything, every phone call, every chat log, every email, every case number eBay gives you. This documentation becomes critical if you escalate to a credit card chargeback, which is worth attempting if you received payment through a method that offers purchase protection on the sending end. Here's the lesson underneath all of this, because there is one, and it goes beyond, be careful on eBay. Platforms like eBay have structured their policies to favor buyers. That's a business decision. Buyers are the majority of the user base, and buyer confidence drives transaction volume. But the consequence of that structure is that sellers bear enormous risk when something goes wrong. The system assumes the seller is the more likely bad actor, and it acts accordingly. If you are selling anything valuable online, anything worth more than you can afford to just lose, you need to protect yourself before the sale closes. Record a video, not just photos, of the item and its serial numbers before shipping. Keep that video time-stamped. Ship with signature confirmation required. Use a payment method that offers some seller protection. Consider whether the platform you're using has adequate recourse if a return is fraudulent. And know, in advance, what your next steps are if a return comes back wrong. The seller in Tampa did almost everything right. The one gap was that even a perfect paper trail wasn't enough to override eBay's automated system once the buyer introduced that jeweler's report. A timestamped video sent to yourself via email or uploaded before shipping would have created an undeniable, dated record that no third-party report could easily contradict. $1,200, a grandfather's watch, and a platform that handed both to a thief. If this happened to you, start with the USPS Postal Inspection Service. Report it there first, then file with IC3. Then go back to eBay in writing with every piece of documentation you have and escalate to every department that will listen. Don't let the first denial be the final answer. And if you're watching this before something like this happens to you, take 20 minutes before your next valuable sale to bulletproof your documentation. It might be the 20 minutes that saves you from a story exactly like this one. If you've ever dealt with a platform dispute, a fraudulent return, or a situation where you did everything right and still got burned, this channel covers exactly these kinds of stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because in the world of online selling, what you don't know can cost you everything.